Is note risk management like flying an airplane? Stay tuned. Welcome to this week's edition of NoteSchool TV, where we bring you the most amazing content and the most amazing guest when at 11:05 Central Time. This week is, we have an amazing guest, and we'll bring him on in just a minute. Before we do, let's have you hit that like button. Go ahead and do that and share this with your friends. Guys, this is something that your friends, your associates, your business friends, all of those will find value in what we do here at NoteSchool. So make sure and like that. If you have not already subscribed to NoteSchool TV, make sure and go ahead and do that so you can go back and watch our many episodes of NoteSchool TV. And then finally, hit that bell notification, boom, so that you'll be notified every week when we go live. When? 11:05 Central Time. Also, make sure and continue to share your comments. Eddie and I love to hear from you guys. We love to hear from what you have to say. So make sure and continue to share those comments. And if you would like to know more about what we do at NoteSchool, simply go to noteschool.com/TV. Again, noteschool.com/TV. So with that, let's talk about the news this week. So according to CNN Business, regulators close the Philadelphia-based Republic First Bank, and it is the first bank failure in 2024. The last bank failure we had was Citizens Bank, a regional Citizens Bank in Sac City, Iowa, and that was in November. Now, Republic operates in Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. And again, the biggest causes with regionals, rising interest rates, falling commercial values, they've all heightened the financial risk for many of these smaller regional and commercial banks. And I thought this was really interesting. And I think we've reported something similar to this before, but banks with over $100 billion in assets. Commercial real estate represents about 12.5% of their loan portfolio. Banks with less than $10 billion in assets, it represents 38% of their loan portfolio. So, that's the big challenge with the regionals. That was the business that they went after. And those are the banks that are more at risk. And by the way, the biggest bank out there is JP Morgan Chase. And I think their asset base now is right at $3 trillion. So you go down the list and you look at the smaller regionals, and that's where the exposure is with commercial real estate. So more from that as we move through the year. And with that, I want to introduce, NoteSchool's founder, our chief visionary officer, my friend, and Mr. Eddie Speed.
Hello, Joe.
Well, hello there, sir. How are you doing there with our guest today?
I am good. We have a live guest here with us here at the NoteSchool headquarters today, and we're going to have quite a fun time. Joe, I know that you're a very seasoned pilot. Got a couple thousand hours flying. We've got a mega seasoned airline pilot, former military pilot, and we're going to use an analogy today of how he compares notes to safely flying an airplane.
That's it.
So we're going to have a good time with it.
Sounds good. I'm going to drop off. Hey, Tom, and and I will see you guys at the end of the show. Have fun.
All right.
Thanks, buddy.
Well, I want to introduce you guys to a guy that has been on NoteSchool TV with us before, and he has just a great story. Mr. Tom Forrest, he is my neighbor. We live not far from each other, ironically. And so whenever we get to have him, he actually comes and physically hangs out with us here at the office, and we're thrilled to have you today, Mr. Tom.
Thanks for having me back, Eddie.
So, Tom, you are a mega season pilot.
It's another way of saying old, but yes.
Yeah.
Flying for 43 years. Yeah.
They say they have old pilots and bold pilots, but no old, bold pilots.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, you take too many chances, too many risks, and your career will get cut short. That's for sure.
So I have, I'm not a pilot. I have probably about 1,000 hours in the right seat.
That's better than most people.
And so I have been around a lot of FBOs, which are kind of gas station for airplanes. And
Yeah.
been around a lot of pilots. And so this means a lot to me. And it resonates with me. And your analogy that you were talking about earlier with us, and I thought it would be awesome to share it. What we're going to talk about today is really safeguarding your note investing, Tom. And you are retiring here very quickly.
About 5 weeks. Yeah.
You are retiring from American Airlines as a captain, and you decided a year or so before that you were going to replace all of your pilot income with note income, and you've very successfully done that.
Yes, I have. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Very impressed.
Yeah, I found y'all. I guess time flies, Eddie. It seems like only a year, but it was a little over about 2.5 years ago that I found NoteSchool and dove right in. It was just what I was looking for. I didn't even know it existed. My wife and I just finished our last flip. It was middle of COVID 2021, and very transactional. Not something I want to do in retirement. I want to hang out with the grandkids and play golf and travel and do all that kind of stuff. Not be flipping homes. And the scenery was changing, and you came along just at the right time. I wanted cash flow, but not the headaches. It made a lot of sense, and rather than just studied, I dove in, did set a goal, and actually took about 2 years to reach it. I'm actually working with Martha now to get a few more notes. I think that'll top out at about 30. I call that the check a day club. But it's been a great ride, and y'all have taught me a lot along the way, and the parallels between investing and performing notes and flying an aircraft have been really quite interesting, and that's why I'm happy to be here today and talk about the risk management part of it.
Well, it's so important, right? Mm-hmm. To keep it passive and to keep your money together, you've got to look at some things catastrophically. And you and I have talked about the airplane analogy, and I thought this would be a fun story. So we're going to talk about risk management, really default protection, and how do you keep your money together. And the most important thing we really want to tie it back together with, Tom, is how do you keep it passive?
Sure.
Right? And so that the investments you make are passive investments. I have a saying, you've heard me say it many times, and that is, it ain't the deal you pass up that'll keep you up at night.
For sure.
Right? Mm-hmm. It's the one you bought that you shouldn't have bought. Right? Mm-hmm. So let's go down right to it, Tom. Let's talk a little bit about how you in your mind see it, this whole thing of due diligence, and what analogies you do between that and flying.
Sure. Well, I have a little bit of a mental checklist. When I first started, it was kind of a physical checklist because I was new and wanted to make sure I didn't miss any steps. But, the analogies to flying an airliner and getting into a good performing note are pretty similar. Probably the first thing I do, and it's gotten a lot easier. The analogy with flying an airplane is one of the first things I do is I check the logbook. Used to be that was a big, thick document that sat in the aircraft and flew with the airplane. Now, believe it or not, it's on an iPad, just like everything else. All the navigation charts and everything are on that. So when I get to the airport, before I even get out of my car, I would get on my iPad and I look at the condition of the airplane, its history, and I liken that to the servicer notes and the pay history of the underlying borrower on the note. I go through that, and honestly, Eddie, I kind of, being an engineer and everything, I'm kind of a servicer notes nerd. Yeah. I really enjoy looking through that stuff. Sometimes it's 60 or 70 pages, but it tells a story. It tells a story behind just a piece of paper and the people there. There have been hiccups in the payments. There, especially during COVID, I really like notes where people have paid without fail during COVID. That might not have been possible, but are they close to being on time all the time? Maybe a hiccup here or there, but no plane is perfect, and maybe no pay history is perfect in the world we work in. But the closer we can get to that, the better. I look for it's kind of like similar to an aircraft. Is one of the engines always leaking oil? Would that leaking prevent it from getting cross country? What's the history been on all the different systems? And the cleaner that is, the more confident I am to move forward to the next parts of the process. Once that happens, I've looked at the logbook, which would be the servicer notes pay history. If I'm satisfied with that, the next step would actually be to evaluate the collateral. In flying, that would be go out and do a pre-flight, an exterior pre-flight. And the check airmen and the trainers always tell us the first thing you do is just kind of step back and look at the airplane in total. Just look at it front to back. Sometimes things become apparent just looking at it from a distance. So in that case, that's taken, looking at the pictures that I've been provided with, on a BPO or looking at Google, things like that. Eddie talks about there are flowers in the flower box.
Mm-hmm.
Does it look good? Does it show a pride of ownership? Is it someplace that it looks like the person is proud to be in and is going to continue to want to do that? Have they made improvements? Things like that. And in flying an airplane, I'll look at that stand back view, and then I'll dig in a little bit more. I'll go ahead and I'll be looking in the wheel well, checking, in icing, I'll be looking at the tops of the wings, make sure we don't have frost, things like that. But there's a lot of things you can see close up. But first, you want to look at the big picture. When you move in, you're looking for hydraulic leaks, fuel leaks, all sorts of minor little things, maybe a scuff on the tire. And I equate that in the note world to things like maybe some code violations, or maybe there's a modification on the loan, things like that. Things that require a little bit more investigation before I move forward. In the airline world, we have a thing called the minimum equipment list. It's a document about that thick. On the iPad, it's a click now, but it used to be about that thick. Mm-hmm. Shows every system on the airplane and what's acceptable to take degraded. In other words, there can be things inoperative on an aircraft that's perfectly safe to go with because we have redundant systems. Mm-hmm. And so when I go into that MEL, I'm looking to make sure that a particular issue doesn't have to be fixed by maintenance before we go. And does it make sense? Maybe in the conditions we're going in, we don't have a beautiful, clear day. We don't need our low visibility landing system. But if we're going into a place where it's for really low visibility, we need that. So it could be situational. But, when it comes to those types of things, I'm looking at the street view. I'm going into all sorts of different resources to check some of the things that may have come up, when I'm looking at the property that I didn't really care for. Might have been some liens in the past. Maybe there's a code violation. I may have said that already. But anything that comes up on a little bit closer inspection of the collateral itself, I'll want to get resolved before we go.
Tom, I was gonna kind of sort of draw an analogy. Your mental checklist is so good. Mm-hmm. Your analysis of your checklist is so good. So what you're really saying is the first thing you do, or you're sort of measuring the propensity to be paid.
Exactly. That's
right. What's the odds they're going to pay me? Right.
Right.
We hadn't talked about much the collateral yet, as far as they don't pay, and we'll talk about that next.
Okay.
But what we've done is you've analyzed the pay history, and you used it. Your analysis of similar to the plane's logbooks, right? It's the history. It's
exactly.
And so a lot of times in the type of notes we're buying, the buyer might have some injured credit, but once again, they're proving that they're going to make that house payment.
Exactly.
And that's a big deal, right?
Absolutely. And obviously, there's no guarantee. Anything can happen at some time, just like when we lift off, anything can happen. I've had engines come apart, and things happen that weren't planned, that we could never have predicted by looking at the logbook. But we mitigate our risk by looking at that propensity to pay, and everybody stumbles once in a while. Payment could have gotten lost in the mail. It could have been something very, very innocuous. But as long as they're obviously showing that they intend to pay and they take it seriously, that propensity to pay is probably the most important aspect of the note, because I could have the most beautiful collateral in the world, but if people aren't going to pay on it, then I don't want to be interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, you're not buying a performing note to go take the property back, right?
No, exactly.
You want good for them,
right?
They say the best borrower is the one that you barely know their name.
Absolutely, and that's true. Having I got a couple dozen notes now, and I know a lot of the addresses just by the address. I mean, the borrowers by the address. If I dug in, it's like, oh, that's Mary so and so. Yeah, but if they're paying and the check comes in each month, they're not top of mind. It really is that simple. There are a few people who have been challenged over the the last couple of years that I've owned notes, but with a little nudge back from the servicer or a notice of default or something like that in some cases, well, then they're right back on schedule again. So, but to stay on topic, it's all about trying to mitigate the risk. And I'll be much more interested in a property where the propensity to pay is very high than somebody who constantly has to be reminded and get caught up.
All right. So those are some great lessons that you've given us about how you analyze what your checklist is, your due diligence checklist. I learned one thing about being around pilots, right? Even the most seasoned pilot in the world, guys with thousands of hours flying like Tom has, they still literally go through a checklist before they take off on that plane, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, like you wouldn't fly with somebody that didn't do that.
Well, and it makes our industry really safe, Eddie, because, honestly, with my experience in the airplane, I could just hop in, throw the switches and go. But the guy next to me might not have that experience. And it's called trapping threats. It's threat management, threat mitigation. And what's cool is that I fly with pilots of all seniority. Well, the guy I flew with a few weeks ago had only been here 3 weeks. I fly with other pilots from other bases who I don't even know. But when he sits down in the seat, we do our pre-flight, then I call for the checklist. It's the same thing every time. Doesn't matter whether he has 10,000 hours or this is his first flight off of being checked out. We run everything the same.
Well, in the way you're describing your note analysis, right? You look at the pay history and you look at other issues related to the borrower. Is he paying his taxes? Has he had code enforcement issues? Is there something that kind of throw up that red flag, as you say?
Right.
I call it roses in the flower bed, right?
Yeah.
And what that means is their house may not be as nice as your house.
Right.
Okay, that's fair. A lot of times we're buying country property or working class property and stuff. And so it's not going to be maybe as fancy as your house, but it's their home. Right. And they want it. And that means something to them to own that home. And it means something to you that you own the note, that you're later going to sign a release of lien one day. And they say, by God, I paid for my house.
And it means a lot to them. And you can tell it through your due diligence that it means a lot to them. If it doesn't look like it means a lot to them, if there's 3 feet of grass there and they keep getting in trouble with the city and the neighbors are complaining, or they don't bother paying their taxes, then there's other notes out there to get involved with. There's other airplanes that I can strap on other than that one.
So the idea here is if you're buying a performing note, the redeeming factors versus the unredeeming factors. And you've talked about some of that balance, right? Usually we don't buy a perfect note, right? There's some unredeeming variable, but it way is overcome by the redeeming factors. And that is the plane analogy. You think the plane's going to make the destination.
If I didn't, I obviously wouldn't get in. This isn't my fighter jet days where I could get out if things go bad. I'm riding this thing to the end, and so are the passengers. So well, like I said, we expect everything to go. We plan for everything to go well, and there are times where I've had to say no, I'm not comfortable, either with the note or with the airplane. And in the airline world, we don't get a lot of pushback. The captain's the ultimate authority, and if I don't feel comfortable taking it for whatever the situation is, it'll get fixed, and we move on. It's all part of the trust they put into me and the trust my passengers have in me to get them safely there. So. We're not at war. It's not a mission. We want to get people from point A to point B safely and as efficiently as we can. And the same with the notes. We do our best to make sure everything's going to go okay based on the information that we have, and that mitigates the chances of having problems. Doesn't completely eliminate them, but it's also something that's very replicable. You talked about checklists and all that, and this is nothing that anybody out there who's worked on notes for a while does differently. It's very simple. We all have our own checklist, so to speak, of going through due diligence to make sure that the note has a very, very high propensity to work out the way we expected it to. And the same with our flights.
And experience helps. We try to help you guys with things that we've seen, patterns we've seen. What's the likelihood this scenario is going to produce a problem versus, as you said, they have a blip, right? It's not likely to happen again. They lost a job during COVID, And as you said, some people just couldn't help it. They just worked for a hotel or a restaurant or whatever, and their world got turned upside down, you know?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, Eddie. It brings up something I hadn't really even thought about. But, you know, every year we have to go back in and take simulator training. It is a pain in the butt, but they do things to us in that simulator we hope to never see on the line. But they do happen. A lot of the training in the simulator is based on real world events. You know, we at the end of every training session, or at the end of every year that I go back, I asked to do the Sully, where we lose both engines at LaGuardia, and I want to recover it back. Lots of real world stuff, and so we are prepared when things go wrong. And I liken that to the calls that we have on Monday, Tuesday, especially Wednesday, the distressed debt calls, because it's one thing to talk about, like, well, yeah, here's what you can do, you know, if things go wrong, and not have seen it before. It's all kind of theoretical. When I hop in the simulator and we go through this, we practice it, it gives me the confidence that if this goes wrong and then the world's on my back right now to land this airplane because we've had this issue, I know it's just like doing it in the simulator. Had several failures during my career of systems, but they all worked out well because we trained to that standard. And with the training that we get through our webinars, where you bring real life things, I consider that a simulator where I can say, well, what would I have done in that situation? And well, Eddie had a better way, and I feel a lot more comfortable if that happens to me.
All right, so let's take the worst case scenario. Let's take the worst case scenario. You're evaluating this possibility up front.
Okay.
And that is, the guy means to pay, he wants to pay, something happened in his life, it's health, it's marriage, it's job, it's some reason, it's some life event, right? And then all of a sudden his world's turned upside down and he can't pay.
Right.
Okay. Now what?
Well, since I've properly pre-flighted, we have alternates along the way. I've got when I fly in the airline, I have a dispatcher watching over my shoulder along the way, watching for weather for me as well. We've planned for basically, you know, I look at being en route. Once we take off when we're en route, it's kind of like being on autopilot. It's not 100% go to sleep passive, but we're monitoring things. We get up to cruise, put the autopilot on. It's much more comfortable for the passengers because we're not hand flying it. We're monitoring systems. We're monitoring the navigation. Dispatchers watching for turbulence up ahead. We're listening for turbulence ahead. And that's kind of what my servicer does, you know, when it comes to the note stuff. And I'll check in, you know, with the servicer once in a while, or the servicer might let me know there's turbulence ahead. The borrower has missed a payment or something like that, or something else is going on. I'll say, well, let's look into that. And we may find out that they've lost a job, or some other difficulties come up that makes continuing flight with this particular note less likely to be practical. And so, you know, I'll work with the servicer to try to get with the borrower and work on some loan or some loss mitigation. Maybe we need to modify the route of the flight or modify the terms of the note. Maybe we just have to take the property back through a deed in lieu, or maybe, you know, it's just time to land. We had an engine failure. They failed to pay and they can't do it anymore. Or in one case, just happened to me on one of, it was a note that I bought where the borrower didn't meet that propensity to pay. So I kind of expected this to happen and was prepared for it. But she basically walked away from the property and it's left in my hands now. And we're foreclosing. So to me, that's like an engine failure. And so we're supposed to land at the nearest suitable airport when that happens. We run our checklists and we have a safe outcome. It's happened to me in real life and it's happened to me in the note world. So we've prepared for this. But since we bought the property at a discount, we've properly planned. This is all part of our pre-flight planning. When we go through foreclosure, I take the property back, but I'm still in a strong position. Just like I consider, you know, an emergency landing, we roll out, go to the gate. That's a safe outcome. That's the way it is with the foreclosure. Then we go ahead and we take the property back, and then we create another flight plan to get that thing working again. So I think that answers your question. It's not that big a deal. We're watching things. We already have a plan to deal with the what if, what could possibly happen. And that's what I'm thinking about when I'm up at altitude. I've got a plan in front of me. I used to fly a lot of all-nighters, go out to Seattle and Portland and fly back in the middle of the night to get back at 5 a.m. And, you know, on my nav system, I have set up, well, if we have something happen right now, depressurization or a engine failure, I've got the fields in front of me and how far they are, which is the closest one, just in case. And that's the planning with the notes. What am I going to do if this happens? And so when it happens, you've already got you just implement that plan and bring it in for a safe conclusion. It's not a terribly big deal if you plan ahead properly.
Well, as you said, you're working on buying about your 30th note, so you're not exactly a rookie anymore, right?
Right.
And you've made some economic decisions to buy loans that not every one of them were perfect. You mentioned one that had trouble in the past, and you bought it at a price. Your price for the asset, I'm going to use the hand analogy here, right? Your price for the asset's worth this, and your price is this.
True.
So you got a fairly significant cushion factor. In fact, you're going to make money.
Yes.
If you're going to get fairly well paid, and you wanted the best for the lady, but she had hiccups in the past.
Right.
And I know that deal, and you and I have talked about that. And so there's times that we'll have a NoteSchool investor that will buy an asset that wouldn't fit every NoteSchool investor.
Right.
Right. Somebody with a little more experience and that type of thing. But generally what you've bought had been fairly passive, right?
Right. And one of the things is I wouldn't have bought that as my first note. That was like my 15th or whatever. And so the fact that that's not paying doesn't bother me because the other ones pay, and that's fine. So yeah, it's passive in regards to the fact that, for the vast majority of my notes, they pay on time. The check or the ACH goes into my account, and I just go about my business looking for my notes or traveling or whatever. I don't have to go hands-on. It's a one-time transaction that I just keep an eye on, just kind of like, I'm sitting in the seat and I'm watching the instruments and watching the engines, making sure everything's running okay. But my servicer is, collecting the payments and doing all that. So it is passive in my regard. I do like to look once in a while, just kind of see how things are going. That's just my nature. I'm kind of like peek in. Are we starting to head into some problems? But I don't have to do that. It's completely hands off. And when you do have to, click off the autopilot and hand fly to an emergency landing because, somebody doesn't pay or whatever, you've already planned in advance for that. And I think that's the biggest analogy we're looking at. And the thing is, there are such steps to take that really anybody can be taught this over time. It's just practice, or you get a lot of repetition mentally by going to the Wednesday call and talking about non-performing notes and how to recover from that. So you don't actually need to have experienced the engine failure to kind of know what to expect.
Well, that's kind of how we look at it. What we're giving our NoteSchool members is a compression of time.
Right.
I'm not smarter than you. We're just more seasoned than you on this subject.
Exactly.
You've used the pilot analogy today, which I've enjoyed. I hope you guys have. Because I've been around planes and flying and stuff like that. One thing I'd say, Tom, is I've flown quite a lot on the airline that you're retiring from. And they say I've been on an airplane a couple thousand times, and according to their records. And I love landing somewhere. And when I get my Uber car and the Uber guy picks me up, he says, "How was your flight?" And I say, "Uneventful."
That's correct. Yep. No items for the logbook.
I'm excited to say that uneventful part.
Well, Eddie, and we can try as hard as we want to make it uneventful. We can't control the weather. We can't control a lot of things. We can do our best. And that's where I think this really likens to the note investment, is that we do our best to make sure everything's going to work out, be completely smooth, and you'll never have to worry about the flight. If we get some hiccups in flight, we can handle it. But no matter what, you're going to get a safe landing out of us no matter what. And that's the number one priority, is this will be a safe landing. May not go as we planned, with a diversion or something like that, but you'll be on the ground safely and nobody's going to get hurt. And that comes from the planning. And it's the same with the note. If it goes bad, we're still not going to get hurt.
Well, and Tom, one last thing for our audience here is the subject today was buying notes that are paying with a high propensity they'll continue to pay.
Right.
We also buy loans where they're not paying, and we know they probably aren't going to pay.
Right.
Right. And that's non-performing notes, and that's a topic for another day. But this is probably, Tom, the most common question that people ask us at like one of our 3-day classes when they first get to know us and we're first showing them these deals. And they're like, "Does a deal ever go bad?" And we're like, "Yeah." And so your story today really helps melt that down into measuring the likelihood something happens and measuring what you do if something happens. So, Joe, I'm gonna let you come back on here. We've used a couple of pilot analogies here today.
Yes, we have. We have, and it is Tom, it's you do the work up front. It's the pre-flight stuff. You do your proper checklist. You do all of those things, and if you do you should know the outcome, right? And that's what we look at, and that's what we look at in the note business. I have a saying that I've always said, but sometimes bad things happen to good people,
right?
And we've kind of planned on that, and we've kind of worked that through. So that's the thing we love about notes, right? Is that we've got ourselves enough room that we can work those out. And loved all the analogies. We got to talk about the simulator ride with landing at LaGuardia with zero power, right? That'll be a summer.
I've made it every time.
Wow.
I've had my last simulator, and when they're done with the FAA required stuff, which has us sweating pretty good, the check airman goes, "Well, is there anything else you want to see?" And the poor FO is ready to get out, and I'm like, "Yeah, one more." And they said it. So now the last one, they set it up at DFW, and we take off, and I tell them at 2,500 feet, kill both engines. And he says, okay. And they do that, and it's a little bit of a turn one way and then a turn around the other. And it's not the prettiest landing. It's not uneventful. Every time I've done it, we walk away. The airplane might be a little banged up, but we get it on the concrete. So it's all to build confidence, because you don't want to be. And once again, Joe, it's kind of like the note analogy. It's like, I'd rather practice this in advance with nobody on board and I can't hurt anything. So, when somebody does foreclose on me, it's like, oh gosh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
So
pretty fun part of what Joe and I get to teach is what you said, Tom. It's how to stress test a deal, and it's important because it's our money and it's our time, and it's that we've done this to be passive and love our investments and get cash flow. But what we don't want is a surprise that we weren't prepared for. And so we try to avoid that at all cost.
Well, I don't want to be up there in the cockpit, like a one-arm wallpaper hanger, either putting out fires all the way. That's not passive. I've gotten to this point in my career by not having to, put out fires every day in my.
I'm just glad to know that you pilots, when you turn it on autopilot, are doing something.
Oh yeah, for sure. We are, and believe it or not, every takeoff's hand flown, and almost every landing's hand flown. There are a couple that require the autopilot, but we have more hands on than people think. So
there you go.
All right, Joe, we're gonna let you close us up.
All right, thank you, Tom. We appreciate you.
See you in a couple weeks.
All right, guys. Well, that's it. That's this week's edition of NoteSchool TV, and yes, another great guest. Tom is. He exemplifies what we have, the type of folks that are investing with us and alongside us at NoteSchool, and we love our students, right? So anyway, with that, we will see you same place, same time next Wednesday at 11:05. NoteSchool.com/TV for more information. We'll see you later.